Hi. Okay. So we're going to continue here and keep in mind all that we've talked about with emotional development and the neurology of that, as well as the social growing that the children are doing. So this is the first time that they're having any kind of opportunity for moral development. If we were together, I would ask you, do you think moral development is nature or nurture? And then I would show you, and I'd have people say, a lot of students say nurture, that it's learned and so forth by parents and everything else. And so then I will show you this video, and you would see, which is uploaded, and I have, 2858. That's where you hook into that video. But you will see these children, very young children, who have sort of this natural tendency towards helping. And so, that as human beings, through time and evolution, we have had to learn to work together and be cooperative, which is something that pro-social behavior, we are reliant upon the majority of the population exhibiting what's called pro-social behavior: helpful, kind, cooperative. This requires empathy, a true understanding of feelings and concerns of another. So the other side of that would be antipathy, or a dislike or hatred of people, and results in antisocial behavior or aggression. This, of course, leads to being antisocial. It can lead to all kinds of psychopathologies in terms of problems in adults that we see. So whether that's psychopathology or narcissism, sociopaths, and so forth. So what we seek, of course, to teach children is a sense of empathy, or what we certainly hope the majority of people want, is to develop empathy and pro-social behavior in children. Now, if we were together, I would go into a little bit more of a longer thing on what does this mean, and do we really do this? So if you were to take your child to the playground and they went to get on the slide and another child cut in front of them, how would you tell them to respond? What would you tell them to do? So think about that for a second. And my argument in all of this is, do we as parents and societies tend to teach children empathy, which is a quality of being that takes time and patience, and it's not easy? Or do we tend to teach them nice behavior, nice social behavior, just teach them to be nice? Or do we really try to teach them the quality of being kind? And the difficulty in this is that it's much quicker to go for nice. And it's also, yes, we want our children to be cooperative members of society and to learn cooperation and working with people. And we want them to cooperate with the rules of behavior that we have. So we do want that sort of simplified version of external behaviors. We also want at some level to create an internal sense of empathy that is natural and not just an external surface layer of niceness. And there's a difference, if you think about it, between nice and kind. And so, there's a discussion about the balance between agency and empathy. Agency being that ability for the child to stand up for themselves, but in a pro-social kind of way, using words or, not necessarily how do we balance the lessons between not getting pushed around in the world, but being empathetic and caring and kind in the world? And so we can tend to, with really pushing for the nice behavior, tend towards less of that agency, where a lot of agency can look like aggression, or I'm not taking anything from anyone, if that's out of balance. So just think on that for yourself. And what does it really require to teach children empathy? And that quality of, a lot of times we teach children, just say, I'm sorry. Just say it, even if you don't feel it. How do we do that? But more to model, to show, to teach what it feels like, to connect their feeling with what they might see in another, to tell stories of emotions. That's why Inside Out is a beautiful movie for young children. Oh, Tommy is hurt. What do you think, how do you think he's feeling? He's crying over there. What could he be feeling? And modeling, the behavior. Oh, I'm sorry, Tommy, that you got hurt. And can I help you? This isn't going to be easy or natural for children necessarily. This is something they learn through time and experience and growth and development. I have been that mom on the nice side before, and I grew up that way. So I get this and I know this, but I think it's an interesting conversation that I like to bring up. Okay. So one of the emotions that young children most have to kind of learn to deal with in this 2 to 6 time period is aggression. It's a natural human function to have this. So how do we help children learn to regulate their aggression? Well, first of all, let's just talk about the fact that there's 4 different kinds of aggression. Instrumental. You have a toy that I want, I'm going to take it. I always want the toy somebody else has, and I'm going to take it. Me, mine. Common among young children, becomes less prevalent with age, hopefully. Reactive. Retaliation for an act. So somebody butts in front of me in line or knocks me, even if it's by accident, and I just fling out my arm or push them. It's reactive. It just happens like that. I don't have the mechanisms to necessarily control that, or I'm just not good at it, or I'm slow at learning it. Indicates a lack of emotional regulation, but I believe too, over time and with age and with practice, children learn this one. Relational, insults or social rejection intended to hurt another. Which sex do you think is honestly better at this one? Started long ago. Yes, ladies, women tend to be better at this one. And it starts really young. We could have that discussion if we were together again about, I see it in very young girls, actually, a little more. Well, you're not my friend today, or I'm not going to play with you today, or you can't play with them. We see it very, very young. And how do we not just, it can make us cringe and hate seeing that, but this can be natural or normal in children, but where are they getting it from? How are they doing it? But how do they respond to it? What do they learn on their own, and how do we guide or model moving forward? Bullying, unprovoked, repeated attack to inflict physical or mental harm. So we'll talk more about bullying in middle childhood, quite honestly. So what I have on, there's a news story. I think there's an article and a video about a news story. And if you watch it, it's about a fight over a parking space between adults. And I want you really to look for, you will find at least 3 out of 4 of these in adults. And so we realize that it's not just, by 6, oh, we've got this emotional regulation down. When you're watching this and listening to this, try to then go back and say, well, what could have gone on? How could both of these parties responded to aggression in themselves, or been responded to in learning to regulate that in this time period? How does what happened in this time period, or how we deal with that microcosm of the playground, how does it then show up on a parking lot 20 years later? And that's what's important, that these are small things that are growing these people and how they respond to the world, and they're working models of themselves and the world around them. Okay, so here's a question for you. Imagine that you are the parent of a preschooler. The table is set for breakfast. Your child spills half a gallon of milk all over the table. How do you feel? What do you say or do? Now, I want you to think, I know a lot of us, well, I would be very calm, and I would be, oh, honey, mistakes happen. Some of you, I love you if that's your, initial reaction. Many of us would be like, oh, God. I know I'm going to have to clean it up because they're just not going to be able to do it. So we have an initial reaction, but what is it our hope that we do ultimately is be like, okay, we've made the mess, now we need to clean it up. It's not a big deal. These mistakes happen, but let's learn to clean it up. But now if I tell you, what if you are a parent that's working 3 jobs, a single parent working 3 jobs, and it's the last gallon of milk that you can afford for the next 2 weeks? Does it change your reaction, your response? Probably. So that's just a question to start understanding how stress, one, can impact parenting and an experience and what we can do. And then also parenting styles in general are different among people, but they can also be impacted by outside influences and what's going on in our system, in our lives, in our body, because we're going to talk about different parenting styles. So Diana Baumrind, 60s and 70s, looked at parents and looked at 4 different ways to sort of parenting dimensions. Expressions of warmth, how affectionate, and so these are all on a continuum between very affectionate to cold and critical. Strategies for discipline, very permissive, very strict. Communication, be seen and not heard, be seen and not heard, only I communicate, do what I say, my way or the highway, to lots and lots and lots of communication. Expectations of maturity, just very little children need to be able to just man up, handle things like little adults, to sort of age-appropriate kind of development. So then there are 4 different kinds of parenting that we talk about that she found. So authoritarian parenting, high behavioral standards. So authoritarian, and be careful between authoritarian and authoritative. They are different. And, doing a parent, this is one of your choices for your your early childhood case study. So is parenting style. So be really careful between the difference between authoritarian parenting and authoritative parenting. Authoritarian is the my way or the highway. Not a lot of warmth, not a lot of communication, or it's one-sided communication, parent to child, strict discipline, and high standards. Okay, that would be like way on the high end of that. Permissive parenting is like the other end of the spectrum. Lots of communication, lots of warmth, little discipline, and little control, and not very high standards. Authoritative, smack in the middle, that we have limits, we enforce them, but we're flexible, we listen, lots of, warmth and love. Neglect is kind of none of it. It's just not there. And probably the most dangerous of all, right? So this is a little video movie clip from the movie Dead Poets Society. You'll see kind of a father and parent in action. And you can kind of pretty easy guess which one of these they are. So children of authoritarian parents, Baumrind found a lot of that they were conscientious, obedient, and quiet, but not especially happy. So authoritarian are very strict. These children try hard, perfectionistic, but they're not necessarily happy. They don't have a real strong sense of who they are necessarily. They feel guilty or depressed, blame themselves. They rebel often and leave home. So if you think about, I know when I went to college, and it was like, you could tell the kids who had really strict households kind of just went, rah, when they got to college, because it was their first taste of freedom. Permissive parents, the children tend to be unhappy and lack self-control, especially in peer relationships. Suffer from inadequate emotional regulation. They've been allowed, the idea being they've been allowed to do anything to be number one in every situation, so they're not really good at all of those social situations, or very mature. Authoritative children are perfect. Sorry. I have a little bit of an issue with this, and we'll talk about that. Successful, articulate, happy with themselves, generous with others. And uninvolved parents, immature, sad, lonely, and at risk of abuse, social and cognitive problems. So these are our neglect children that we've talked about and seen. Some of the problems, her original sample had little economic, ethnic, or cultural diversity, focused on attitudes and daily interactions. So, and the other thing is, so one thing is that some authoritarian, so this goes back to culture too. Authoritarian parenting is very common in some cultures, but authoritarian parenting that's very high in warmth. So it's kind of my way or the highway, and you're going to listen to me, but I love you, and I just love you, and I'm going to hug you, but, elders know best, right? And so it's not all that clear cut that it's one side or the other. Some permissive parents do guide. They do give some limits, but they guide with words and not rules. So this can, it's not always that clear cut. Now, what I would say, and the part that bothers me a little bit is, if we were together, I'd ask you, and we have this discussion, how many of you came from households where there were 2 different styles, right? So you have like the authoritative mom or dad, and you have like the really authoritarian other parent. And so then the child is going to have to learn to navigate those different styles and how they're going to be. And each are going to affect the child in different ways, and you're going to have a blending rather than a one or the other. Also, I think as a person who really has a cognitive and heart desire to be an authoritative parent, I know that when I am under stress, or in moments when I am not mindful or have not been doing my practices, that I will fall one way or the other. And I think we have a stress style of parenting too. And for me, it can depend on, okay, fine, whatever, do whatever you want, or no, it just depends on where I am. And those are the times we have to also get really good at that repair, the reparation, where we have to have a lot of self-awareness to see in ourselves that we have that. So it depends on how parents show up to all of these things. And I don't think you have like the clear cut, always one way. Maybe some do, and I think that's gorgeous. But I think a lot don't, or they come from different styles. So just an interesting little idea to think about. So what about discipline or punishment? The only thing I'm going to talk about really here, research is going to show that physical punishment is, in the long run, not good. We could have that argument, and there, lots of different things. We're not together. I'm not going to talk on that. Cultures are different. Family cultures are different. Ideas are different around that. How it's done is different. Of course, is there a difference between spanking and abuse? And all of these lines have been drawn over the years. Research will show that it's not the best way of dealing with behaviors. Many children who are spanked do not become violent adults because there's a lot of other things that come into play there, but not necessarily the best way. So then we have two others. Timeout involves separating a child from other people for a specified time. I will say here, and this is why I really love the book No Drama Discipline, is that Dan Siegel talks about timeout as being, and I used it some, but timeout as being an isolating factor. And that when you isolate children, you're not really doing what you want for them. But he likes the idea of a time in. So if we teach children this mindful way of being, this kind of idea of time in, to really, and we work with them on understanding and connect with them before we redirect them. Anyway, it's a whole book. I can't go into it here. Psychological control is probably the worst. Neglect and abuse, of course, but in terms of forms of discipline, threatening to withdraw love and support relies on a child's feeling of guilt and gratitude to get them to respond and act the way we want. So, using a child's love, if you loved me, you would. And this isn't only in parent to child, but in relationships that do this. And it can really be harmful to the development of the self and to autonomy and to, but again, I don't know. This, and if you look at it from a cultural perspective, can be different in terms of the values there. But the book talks some about the psychological control. And so you can look a little more at that. So that is all I'm going to do on chapter 10. I know that's actually a lot. This has been a long unit. And you have some stuff, articles, videos that you can watch that I suggest, request. But I wish you well until the next time. Take care.